The Odyssey is set approximately 3,000 years ago in a world that no longer exists. A world of fortified citadels, bronze weapons, gift exchange economies, and gods who attend assembly on Olympus and take a personal interest in human affairs. But here's what I want you to notice. It was not set in that world, even when Homer composed it. The events the poem describes, the Trojan War, the returns of the heroes, the wanderings of Odysseus, belong, in Homer's mind, to a distant heroic past. Homer himself was probably composing somewhere in Ionia in the 8th century BCE. The world he was writing about was already 4 or 5 centuries behind him. A world remembered through oral tradition, transformed by time, made mythic by the distance. This gap between the world Homer depicts and the world Homer inhabits is not a problem. It is the poem's engine. To read the Odyssey well, you need to understand both worlds, the Bronze Age world that haunts the poem and the 8th century world that shaped the poet's eye. Today, we examine both. And then we turn to the gods. Between roughly 1600 and 1100 BCE, mainland Greece was dominated by a remarkable civilization centered on fortified palace complexes at Mycenae, at Tiryns, at Pylos on the western coast of the Peloponnese. We call this the Mycenaean civilization after its most celebrated site. This was a literate civilization. The Mycenaeans used the script called Linear B, a syllabic writing system deciphered only in 1952 by the architect Michael Ventris, to keep palace records, inventories of grain and livestock, lists of women workers and their rations, records of bronze weapon allocations. Linear B is not a literature, it is a bureaucratic technology and a ruthlessly practical one. Then, around 1200 BCE, something catastrophic happened. In the space of a few decades, virtually every palace centre across the eastern Mediterranean was destroyed or abandoned. Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, all destroyed. The Hittite emperor in Anatolia, gone. Urban centres across the Levant, abandoned. The causes remain debated. Climate disruption, drought, the migrations of peoples Homer calls the sea peoples, internal social collapse, probably all of these in combination. What historians call the Bronze Age collapse remains one of the great unsolved catastrophes of antiquity. Greece did not recover quickly. What followed was a period of roughly 4 centuries, the Greek Dark Age, during which populations fell sharply, long-distance trade collapsed, literacy disappeared along with Linear B, and the great palace economies were replaced by small, scattered communities living close to subsistence. And yet something survived. The oral tradition kept the Bronze Age world alive, not as accurate history but as myth. The memory of the great citadels, the heroes who fought at Troy, the kings who ruled from halls of polished stone, was preserved and transformed through generations of oral performance. When Homer builds his world, he is building from ruins, physical ruins in the landscape around him, and cultural ruins in the tradition he inherited. This is why the Odyssey's Ithaca is not quite a real place. It is a memory of a kind of world that no longer existed, reshaped by centuries of storytelling into something that speaks to the 8th century's own concerns. The restoration of legitimate authority, the integrity of the household, the question of what makes a king. And now, to the gods. And here I want to make an argument that may initially seem counterintuitive. The gods in the Odyssey are not metaphors. In most modern discussions of mythology, there is a tendency to translate divine figures into psychological or natural forces. Athena becomes reason, Poseidon becomes the sea, Eros becomes desire. This can be a useful entry point, but in Homer it misleads more than it illuminates, because in Homer the gods are not standing in for something else. They are themselves. They are the structural forces acting in the world with their own characters, their own agendas, and their own histories of grievance and favour. The Odyssey opens not on Ithaca, or on Calypso's island where Odysseus is stranded, but on Olympus. Zeus is presiding over an assembly of the gods, and he makes a statement of remarkable theological precision. Mortals, he says, blame the gods for their sufferings, but in fact men bring suffering on themselves through their own recklessness, as Aegisthus has just done by killing Agamemnon and stealing his wife, despite a divine warning. This is Homer establishing the terms of the poem's moral universe. Divine and human agency work together to produce outcomes. The gods are not omnipotent puppet masters. They do not determine everything. But neither are they simply projections of human psychology. They are presences, powerful, real, with bounded but genuine authority over the conditions of human life. Poseidon hates Odysseus because Odysseus blinded his son Polyphemus. This is not symbolic. The enmity is personal, sustained, and consequential. It is the reason Odysseus's homeward voyage takes 10 years instead of a few weeks. Athena favours Odysseus because she recognizes in him a quality she values: cunning, endurance, the capacity to think clearly under pressure. Homer explicitly tells us that Athena loves Odysseus because he is, in terms of practical intelligence, the mortal most like her. Athena is, in fact, the most active character in the Odyssey. She appears in more scenes, across more of the poem's action, than any human figure. She guides Telemachus into his journey of maturation. She negotiates with Zeus for Odysseus's release from Calypso's island. She accompanies Odysseus in disguise on his return to Ithaca. She stages the recognition scenes. She holds back the dawn so that Odysseus and Penelope have time to speak. Odysseus is, in a sense, Athena's project. The poem's entire action is shaped by her determination to bring him home. What does this mean for the way we read? It means we should take the divine dimension seriously on its own terms, not reduce it to something more comfortable. When Homer tells us that Athena put an idea into Telemachus's mind, or that Hermes escorted the souls of the dead suitors to the underworld, these are not literary decorations. They are claims about how the world works, a world in which the divine and the human are interwoven, in which no human action is entirely autonomous, and in which the gods' interest in human affairs reflects genuine moral stakes of what human beings do. A brief word on reading Homer in English, which is where almost all of us will encounter him. Translation is always an argument about what the original means, and different translators make different arguments. For the Odyssey, 3 translations dominate serious readers' shelves, and they offer genuinely different experiences of the poem. Richmond Lattimore's translation, first published in 1965 and still in print, is the scholar's choice. Lattimore works in a long line designed to approximate the feel of Homer's hexameter verse. The result is sometimes austere, occasionally awkward, but consistently faithful to Homer's syntax and his ceremonial weight. If you are reading alongside the Greek or want to write seriously about the poem, Lattimore is your starting point. Robert Fagles, published in 1996, is the great popular translation of the late 20th century. Supple, energetic, readable at speed, Fagles sacrifices some of the stateliness of the original for momentum, and occasionally modernizes idiom in ways that flatten Homer's archaism, but as an entry point, and as sheer reading pleasure, it is hard to beat. Emily Wilson's 2017 translation is the most recent and, in some respects, the most interesting. Wilson made a deliberate decision to match Homer's Greek line for line. One English line for every Greek line, a constraint that forced her into compression and exactness that previous translators avoided. Her Homer is cleaner and less rhetorically inflated than Fagles, more accessible than Lattimore. She is also alert to the social world of the poem in ways that add genuine interpretive value. My recommendation for this series is to use whichever of these you have access to. Lattimore if you want rigour, Wilson if you want freshness, Fagles if you want to be swept along. Next week, we turn to the Telemacheia, the first 4 books of the Odyssey, which follow not Odysseus but his son. This is one of the boldest editorial decisions in Western literature. Homer begins a poem about a hero's return by spending 4 books with a young man who does not know if his father is alive. We will look at why Homer makes that choice, what it tells us about the poem's deepest concerns, and why Telemachus, often treated as a supporting character, is in fact one of literature's most precise portraits of what it means to grow up. Subscribe, and I will see you next Thursday.